Well, to be honest with you, I was tempted to say, hey, remember that episode we did last week about that Bernie Sanders campaign organizer who wanted to have everybody sent to re-education camps and Republicans killed and all the rest of it? Just watch that again, and then we can go off and have ourselves a margarita. But I've decided, no, that would not be the moral stand to take. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott, and this is Your Right Angle, made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com and also by our friends over at the Patriot Post, who have the greatest memes on the internet and who been a lot of fun to work with and who we enjoyed very much. So check them out in the link down below. Well, guys, I actually wrote an Afterburner about this back at the previous establishments quite a while ago. But James O'Keefe, as it turns out, I was in the room for part of it. James O'Keefe learned how to reveal these videos that he's taken, these undercover videos from the all-time master of understanding how the media works. That was Andrew Breitbart. I ended up calling that Afterburner the Breitbart reveal because the pattern is so profoundly intelligent and so unavoidably it's an escape-proof trap. But basically, it goes something like this. Oh, I suppose I should make this a little bit clearer in the beginning. A second video has turned up of one of Bernie's supporters calling for Republicans to be guillotined. He's going to ammo up. It's going to be a shooting war. Republicans need to go into the re-education camps. Get to that in a minute. But what I called the Breitbart reveal works something like this. Steve, let's start with you.
Sure.
My theory on the Breitbart reveal is this. First of all, you produce a video that's shocking, which is, in this case, was the first guy saying Republicans need to be killed. And of course, Acorn was the thing that really brought James O'Keefe to the national forefront and justifiably so. So you put out a video that's shocking to the enemy, and they tend to either ignore it like, whatever. So then you bring out another one. And now you've actually got enough of a thing to say too. And they'll say, well, two guys doesn't make a whole campaign. These are just a couple. You've just been cherry picking. So then you bring out a third one. And then they start to make all kinds of denials. And then the fourth video comes out, which goes right in the face of all those denials. They're not really Bernie Sanders people. And you get something, I've been working on the Bernie campaign since Bernie was running, that kind of thing. And basically what you do is you have all of the denials of something that's absolutely true. You have the people trying to deny it, keep taking a step, and every time they take a step, it's like a ratchet of lie that the next video comes in to cut, to basically illuminate, cut the legs out underneath the defense. So I noticed that in the week since we did the episode on last week's Bernie's, totalitarian fascist campaign organizer who wants his political opponents put up against the wall. I've not heard a thing from the Sanders campaign about it. And do you think now that there's a second one, there's going to be some traction on this, or do you think it disappears down the mainstream media memory hole?
Oh, good question. Gosh, they love Bernie so much. It's hard to predict. Yeah. I'm kind of reminded of some of the criticism of Jonah Goldberg's book, Liberal Fascism, when that came out. Gosh, it must be 10, 12 years ago now.
Yep.
And the two major complaints against the book Liberal Fascism from the left were it's not true, and everyone knows this. And sometimes you could find those two complaints in the exact same review of the book. Just outstanding in the lack of self-awareness, hypocrisy, whatever you want to call it. I mentioned on the backstage segment something that the media does with these slow reveals that probably deserves a wider audience, and that is the media's attempt to sort of try and co-opt the Breitbart reveal, which is after the first one comes out, oh, it's just one guy. The second video comes out, oh, it's just a coincidence. Third one comes out, and the attitude is, oh, it's old news by now. And so it goes. The thing is, what these videos do, I think, more than anything, is to keep us from getting dispirited. We think the worst, and you hope that your thoughts of the worst of some other human being aren't true. And it's really hard to believe the worst of your fellow human being all the time. And you don't want to feel that way all the time. And so it's hard to keep that energy up, even in an election year. But then you see things like this, where actual field organizers for the campaign, organizers, plural, I suspect there are more than two, saying that they, yes, want to round us up and stick us in re-education camps or forced labor camps or whatever the socialist happy fun place of the week is. You know what I'm reminded of? this thought came out of left field. But do you remember a couple of years ago now, there were these, Bill, you mentioned the guy talking about ammoing up to fight the conservatives. Do you remember
this guy does that too?
Yeah. Do you remember the video that came out a couple, 3 years ago about Democrat or left-wing groups forming shooting clubs, going out into the woods and setting up targets and shooting, and they had no range safety discipline whatsoever. I don't know if you watched any of these videos, but I can't believe anybody didn't get killed or wounded during these things. You got guys just free firing all over the place. There's no range safety instructor. There's nothing going on, but I got a bunch of guys and gals out there just shooting at stuff. No discipline whatsoever. And so when I think of these guys ammoing up, I think it's all bluster, Bill. I hope it is anyway. And the reason is, if these guys were actually going out there every weekend and doing this, there'd be a dozen dead by now after this many years in this little discipline. So I think this was a one-time thing done for the cameras, and then they just put their guns in a closet or whatever. And as individuals, they pose no threat whatsoever. Well, very little threat, ask Steve Scalise. But if you get these guys actually in charge of the government, and, it can happen here.
Yeah, ask Steve Scalise is exactly right.
Yeah.
Scott, this one is a little more interesting than the last one because he goes into more detail. And when I say he goes into more detail, he doesn't just say that Republicans need to go to the Gulags. He issues a ringing endorsement for the Gulags. He basically says these things were swell. He says that there are more prisoners, he didn't say political, there are more prisoners in America today than there were in the Gulag at the height. That's a fact. What he doesn't say is that the people who are in prison in America have been found guilty by a jury of their peers for committing heinous crimes, and a serious number of them, in order for them to be remaining in prison, and that virtually every single person in the Gulag was a political prisoner who had done nothing wrong, had not broken any laws, were loyal Soviet citizens, and the only people who had the free run of the Gulag were the actual criminals who were used to keep people in place. He also went on to praise the Baltic White Sea Canal, which he said people from all around the world came to work on it. He said it was a beautiful thing. It was such a beautiful thing that it was administered by Gingrich Yagoda, who was the second chief of what would eventually become the KGB. And the lowball estimate is 25,000 people died building that crummy little canal, which was built too shallow because it was built too fast and it didn't even take any ships anyway. 25,000 people worked to death, but it's a beautiful thing, Scott.
It's amazing that the view of the hard progressive left in the United States toward the former Soviet Union and other communist dictatorships has essentially not changed from when they were defenders of them, or let's say it this way, when their grandfathers were defenders of them, their ideological grandfathers back in the day. I think I remember from last week's O'Keefe Project Veritas video that the guy who they had on hidden camera was making the case that the gulags paid a living wage. That you were actually, it was a re-education camp, but, that was a decent place to be and they paid a living wage.
Wow.
And also that breaking rocks is a good way to build character in a young billionaire. So, you yank him out of his billionaire world and put him in a place where he can break rocks, and that's good for him to build character. But as to O'Keefe's specific technique of releasing these videos, the mastery involved here is something that most people in journalism haven't really figured out. There is an arc to a story, and certain things have to happen in order to keep people engaged in a story. And so much of the way news stories are done is they just kind of throw everything at you. There's no sense of why should I keep watching or anything like that. But what O'Keefe has done, and Breitbart taught him to do, is that he continues to build these to the condition of jeopardy.
Correct.
It's a little
they
bit
get
at the
more
beginning.
and more nutty and dangerous.
Yes, and then the next little arc gets a little bit higher jeopardy, and finally, when the ultimate video is released, which I'm assuming he's following this path, you should do this. It will be the one that was essentially worst of all. And when you do this well, when you release this material in this sequence well, you wind up giving the audience this sensation of, I don't believe it, and I knew it. And that's when you watch a great movie, as it builds that jeopardy and anticipation. When the ultimate, culmination of it comes to be, you're like, wow, I knew it. And I think that's what O'Keefe is building toward. And there are going to be a lot of people who are saying, wow, and a lot of people saying, I knew it, as this thing leaks out. What amazes me is there was a day when you could, Alan Funt could run around with a hidden camera, anchored behind a fake wall and get video of people doing ridiculous things or saying ridiculous things, because the idea that you would be captured on camera in a public place seemed absurd. Now, everybody has a camera in a public place. And the fact that these guys who are field organizers for Bernie Sanders' campaign don't live with the constant awareness that their actions and words may be being recorded every moment of the day just shows you that either they think they can't possibly lose, or these are the biggest idiots who ever waded into the public political cesspool.
And embrace the healing power of Scott.
There is the third option, which is they really believe this. And that is the actual option that I believe is actually the case. I'm glad you mentioned that, Scott, because, I've often thought, wow, if I was out there with some friends and stuff and somebody from the left had a hidden camera on me and so on, would I have to worry about it? And I realized, no, I wouldn't say anything to my friends that I would find embarrassing or I have to deny, because I say what's on my mind and I believe the things I say. And when I say I think racists and Nazis and all the rest of it are horrible people who I want nothing to do with, that's not something I say publicly, while in private I think something different. This is the entire pathology of the left. They cannot say what they really believe, and so they have to tell the public story. And that's why you can get hidden camera videos of these guys telling you what they really believe. In both cases, last week's and this week's, we're dealing with the same kind of person. Young males, definitely beta males, but they're trying to act tough. They're like a bunch of teenagers. It's like watching a 13-year-old smoke a cigarette is what it's like watching these guys trying to act real hard. They're down with the revolution. They're carrying the banner of the proletariat and all the rest of it. Both of them talked about wanting to go out and start shooting people. This guy goes into some detail about how he's going to go out and get some training and ammo up and arm up, and he's going to be ready. No, he's not. No, he's not. He's not going to do it. He's not even going to get to the range. But even if he did get to the range, one pull of the trigger is going to make him decide, I'm probably better on camera. This is the thing about it that's disturbing and interesting and illuminating all at the same time. Both of these guys, and more to come, and Bernie Sanders himself, and leftists, progressive leftists, all feel this way, that things like reeducation camps are necessary for your political opponents, that you can't just disagree with people. They must be wiped out, either exterminated or imprisoned. They believe that any speech that's opposing what they want to do must simply be destroyed, not just argued with, all of that. They have no problem whatsoever with doing things to people that they would be absolutely appalled at if it was done to them. And I think the reason for all of this is actually pretty simple. Despite all of the labels that we've dealt with throughout history, Republicans, conservatives, Democrats, liberals, all of it, it really does come down to individualists versus collectivists. Yeah. And there is, if you are a person, and I believe this is motivated. I don't think that politics changes people. I think people go looking on some level and find the politics that they emotionally connect to. And so what you end up with here is you end up with people who are more than willing to have completely on camera believe that, no, if I was given the power, I would have some of these people executed and I would have the rest sent off to a gulag, and they deserve it. That's because their entire theory of life is that people are simply cogs. They're just bad parts that need to be exchanged out of the machine. They're just defective, sprockets that need to be replaced and then thrown on the garbage heap. The idea that individual people have individual lives and suffer tragedy and so on is beyond their comprehension. So when this guy says that the Soviet Union was actually a leading place for women's rights, he's wrong. Even though hundreds of thousands of women were executed by the communists, they were only about 1/10 of the men that were executed. That millions of men were executed, so hardly fair play there. What you find is that when somebody can talk about the Balmoral Canal and say that it was a beautiful thing, you're talking about somebody who knows so little about what actually happened that all of a sudden everything makes sense. So in any event, I am alarmed by the presence of people like this. And more than that, I am alarmed that there is a political movement that's gaining power and gaining adherents in this country that has no problem whatsoever calling for the physical extermination and imprisonment of their political opponents, and people are not getting up and leaving that party en masse. If I ever was part of a political meeting and I went to and people were calling for this kind of thing for liberals, I would get up and I would leave, and I wouldn't leave in silence. So you people are sick and you need help. This is a disgusting, disgraceful display, and the fact that you're calling yourselves conservatives makes me ashamed and embarrassed, and I'm going to do everything I can to fight you. That's what I would do if I was confronted with this kind of philosophy. It's what Steve would do. It's what Scott would do, and it's what you would do, because you have a soul and a conscience, and you understand that people are individuals. Once again, evidence that this is not just Coke versus Pepsi. This is a fundamental disagreement between how people look at human beings and what their value and worth is. And we can go all the way down the list on that score. But if I were you, I would just sometimes say a little prayer of gratitude that you have enough of a soul, that you have enough human in you that you can understand that just because people disagree with you doesn't mean they need to be locked up in prison or shot by the AK-47, which is the greatest weapon ever made by the Soviets and the liberator of countless peoples around the world, according to this guy. And as a final asterisk, I'll say what I said at the end of the last one. They wonder why we're armed. They have no idea. They can't figure out why people like us maintain firearms against this wacky, nutty, insane, impossible idea that somebody in America might want to actually put you in a camp or physically harm you for your political beliefs. It's on camera. More's coming. That'll do it for this edition of Right Angle, made possible by the members of BillWhittle.com, our friends of the Patriot Post. And we've got about 3 weeks left for you to join us on the boat. We're on a boat, and we are going to be having a raffle to determine who gets to stay on the boat, who's thrown overboard. That'll be enlightening and fun. And all kinds of other activities, which you can find below at BillWhittleCruise.com. We'll provide a life jacket at additional cost. We'll see you hopefully in middle of May for that cruise, and we'll certainly see you next week right here on Right Angle.